Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this, what I think is going to be a very inspiring event here, informative and inspiring. With the intention of our evening here is to inspire you each to consider taking action on climate change yourself and inspiring others to do so, and hopefully you'll come away from this event energized to take action for yourself. I'm Curt Hull. I am the project director at Climate Change Connection. And with Climate Change Connection, I work with Susan and Jennifer, who are also here with us. And Jennifer is going to monitor the chat and allow people in and do the IT responsibilities this evening. But the work that I do with Climate Change Connection, it relates to primarily working on solutions to climate change with a lot of different groups here in the province of Manitoba, primarily working with groups like the Climate Action Team, the Climate Reality Project Canada, Sustainable Building Manitoba, and Efficiency Manitoba. And I'm also involved at a national level, both with the Climate Reality Project and with a group, the Natural Gas Ban group that I'm involved with Seth on. So this event is tied to the Manitoba Youth Influencer Climate Challenge, and which will challenge all Manitoban high school students in grades 9 to 12 to produce a short 1.5 minute viral video reel that generates greater awareness of climate change facts and solutions, especially as it relates to local issues in Canada and Manitoba. And the information is available, and Jennifer's going to put the link to that Youth Influencer Climate Challenge if you want more information. And there's going to be more information made available this Friday. More details will be coming this Friday. So this evening, we're going to be together for about an hour and a half. As you may have seen, the event is being recorded, and it'll be made available at a later date. So I don't know if it's in the chat yet. There we go. There's the youth influencer information is in the link is in the chat there. So if you are interested and you want to get more information, you can get in touch with us by email, info@climatemb.ca. And during this evening's event, we're asking you to you're going to be muted, but we do encourage you to ask questions through the chat, because after our panel has a chance to introduce themselves and give a few of their ideas, and we're going to have some Q&A. Some I'm going to ask, some will come from you. So just encourage you, as these ideas are put in front of you, to put your questions in the chat, and Jennifer's going to monitor the chat for us. So before we get started, it's always a good place to start is with respect to the place that we are meeting from. And since we're meeting virtually, each of us will have to consider the land that we're sharing and what we owe to the past in our own place, wherever we may be. But here, Climate Change Connection, those of us that are in Winnipeg and Climate Change Connection, we acknowledge that we are on Treaty 1 territory, and that Manitoba is located on the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Dakota, Dene, Cree, Oji-Cree, and others. And Manitoba is also the homeland of the Red River Métis, and that northern Manitoba includes lands that were and are the ancestral lands of the Inuit. So I'm going to start with an introduction of their three guests, or guest panelists, and start with Susan, my colleague at Climate Change Connection. Susan is a project manager at Climate Change Connection in Winnipeg. She's been educating the public about climate change for the last 15 years. It's probably more than that now, Susan. Some of her biggest successes have been educating teachers on how to engage and activate students and supporting youth education and action. Prior to coming to see Climate Change Connection, Susan worked as an interpreter at Fort White Alive, and she has also worked for the International Institute for Sustainable Development in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and Monterrey, Mexico. The Youth Challenge International in Guyana, South America, Tiamo Resorts in South Andros, the Bahamas, and the City of Winnipeg in the Waste and Water Department. Susan holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science and a postgraduate in Ecotourism Management. She's a mom, an active volunteer in her community, and a cyclist. Welcome, Susan, and thank you for joining us. Seth Klein is the team lead and director of strategy with the Climate Emergency Unit. Prior to that, he served for 22 years as founding director of the British Columbia office of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, CCPA, Canada's foremost social justice think tank. He's now a freelance policy consultant, speaker, researcher, and writer, and author of A Good War, Mobilizing Canada for the Climate Emergency. Seth is a regular columnist with Canada's National Observer. He's an adjunct professor with Simon Fraser University's Urban Studies program and remains a research associate with the CCPA's BC office. Thank you for joining us and giving us of your valuable time, Seth. Thank you so much. And Cameron, not last and not least, Cameron Armstrong is a third-generation mixed Filipina environmentalist and youth, born and raised on Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Her interests lie in environmental justice, water justice, and empowering Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC youth in environmental spaces. Currently, oops, my light just went off. That's what happens when you have a smart home. Currently, Cameron is the senior program specialist at Youth Climate Lab, where she runs From Root to Sky, a program for BIPOC youth focused on anti-racist climate action and deconstructing systems of oppression within environmental work. Cameron is the Manitoba Regional Organizer for Climate Reality Project Canada and organizes for the Consider Climate Manitoba campaign. Additionally, Cameron is a research assistant at the Center for Human Rights Research at the University of Manitoba and sits on the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada's Youth Advisory Council. In her free time, you can find Cameron hanging out with her cat Frankie or dancing to Carly Rae Jepsen. Thank you so much for joining us, Cameron. There we are. So I think, probably all of our panelists, your resume is as long as my arm, and we've just skimmed the surface of what your contributions have been. But now enough of me talking. Let's give our panelists a chance to share some of their experience and knowledge with us. So I'm going to start by asking each of the panelists the same question and give them all a chance to answer. And I'm going to start with Seth, and the question is, what got you into the climate movement and what keeps you going?
Okay. Well, first of all, hello everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation, and thanks everybody for making time. I guess I alone among you am joining you not from treaty territory. I am joining you from Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory, in otherwise known as East Vancouver, unceded, untreaty territory, and gratefully so. And congrats to the Manitoba Climate Connectors and everyone involved in the Influencer Challenge on this whole initiative. I just want to say off the bat, I'm really looking forward to seeing the videos. So do send them to me. And along the way, I'll share some of our videos. I'd like to say they've gone viral. I mean, they've gotten a few thousand hits. I don't know if that qualifies. But we really need some viral videos, first of all. So good luck to you all. So to directly answer the question, so first of all, I say this because you're an audience mostly of teenagers. I started as an activist as a teenager, when I was 15 years old in Montreal, where I grew up, in the peace and disarmament movement. And at that time in the 80s, it was kind of another existential threat at play, which was the threat of nuclear war. And that's what pulled me into activist life. Um, uh, as Curt said off the top, I spent 22 years with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, which is not an environmental think tank. It's more of a social justice think tank. And and my area of research there really focused more on inequality and poverty, and living wage and things like that. So I actually come to the climate issue through the lens of social justice, and and if you want a sense of how things can change, but back in like 2000, I don't know, 2007, I think it was, our office, the British Columbia office of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, initiated this project called the Climate Justice Project to bring together a whole bunch of community groups and academics to explore this connection between inequality and social justice and climate. And if you can believe it, remember this is 2007, not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. We actually we wondered if anybody would even understand what we meant by the term, because the term climate justice had no currency the way we talk about it now. Um, but the problem once our office started down that road of tackling climate and following the climate science, uh, is that the more you follow it, the more alarmed you become. It just becomes a hazard of the job. And for me, climate causes me a certain amount of panic, particularly as a parent. And so to answer the second half of your question, Curt, what keeps me there? I have two kids, and I want them to know that I did everything that I could. This is the task of our lives, and it's certainly going to define the rest of your lives. So what else are you going to do?
Thanks so much, Seth. And I was trying to hold up my copy of the book, but the thing just keeps coming back. This is Seth's book, and we're at the end of the session. We're going to be giving away a free copy to a lucky winner, and it's a terrific book. Thanks for sharing that, and we'll dive into some of the more of those ideas that you brought forward later in our conversation. But maybe we'll now give Cameron a chance to answer that. I'm curious to know what got you into the climate movement and what keeps you going.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much. And yeah, Seth, thank you for sharing a little bit of your story and what keeps you motivated to be in this good fight and hanging out with us still. So appreciate that. But yeah, hi everyone. My name is Cameron. Also, yeah, calling in from Treaty One territory, Winnipeg. But yeah, I guess that I don't know. I always like to say that I came into the climate movement and environmental movement a little late, which I don't know is a little yeah, I don't know. It wasn't something that I was always necessarily interested in. And if you were to ask me like 5, 6 years ago if I would be where I am today, I definitely would not say that I would be working for an environmental nonprofit or doing quite a bit of advocacy work or doing the work that I am doing. But similar to Seth, I kind of came into this movement always very interested in the social justice aspect of things. And definitely very interested in the science aspect as well too. So my journey kind of started. I was at the University of Manitoba. I was pursuing, a Bachelor of Science in microbiology, and it wasn't really jabbing with me. Didn't feel like a very good fit. Everything was super technical, which I really liked, but I was also kind of missing that like human aspect of things. And I had a couple of good friends who were involved in the policy side of science, which was a very interesting thing that I hadn't really thought about too much. And I actually ended up taking this kind of one-off course on science policy, and I was thinking that okay, will be something that'll kind of bridge the gap between kind of the human aspect of things and also the scientific aspect of things, and it might be a someplace where I can find myself. But It turned out that after a couple weeks in the course, I was the only one left in the course, which was a funny thing. And I don't know if that's allowed to actually happen during your undergrad degree. But I got to hang out with my professor for the entire semester, the two of us talking on Zoom for a couple hours a week, which was really wonderful. But she is a woman named Dr. Merle Ballard, who was an Indigenous scholar at the University of Manitoba at the time, who was from Lake St. Martin First Nation. So a lot of the discussions that we had were about environmental racism in kind of the Interlake of Manitoba and how the superflood of 2011 had really impacted both Lake St. Martin First Nation, Dauphin River First Nation, and a handful of other First Nations in the Interlake of Manitoba. So we chatted about that for a semester. I got to hear a lot of her perspectives and her stories and her knowledge on things, which I feel very honored to have been trusted with. And at the end of that, she was like, hey, I'm actually working on a research project up in the Interlake, and I'm looking for a research assistant. So she invited me to come up to Lake St. Martin with her for the summer and work as a research assistant. And I feel incredibly honored to have been, again, welcomed and trusted by so many of the folks there, and to be gifted with so much knowledge and so many lessons as well too. And it was really quite an interesting introduction into environmental work as a whole, I think. And I feel very lucky to have had both the kind of Western scientific academia side of things as kind of my introduction to things, to learn a little bit about the policy aspect, but also to really be centering relationship and community and forms of knowledge that haven't been taken as seriously as they should have been in the past a little bit as well too, and really trying to create solutions and paths forward that center Western knowledge, but also traditional ecological knowledge and Indigenous science. So that experience. It really did a 180 in my passions and what I was excited about, and the people that I wanted to be working with as well too. It really sparked a very big interest in working with BIPOC folks in centering their voices, both within the environmental sector and within like the climate movement as well. But that's kind of how I got my start with things. But I guess that one of the things, to answer the second part of the question, what keeps me going, is that, I don't know, I'm 24. I've been in and around the climate and environmental world for a couple of years now, but I feel very honored to have created such a wonderful community of young people, and to be inspired and really just, blown away by a lot of the work and drive that young people are doing right now. And kind of really focusing again on that relationship and community aspect of things as well too, that it's cool to be inspired by people, but it's also cool to have friends who are doing the same work as you, that are very smart and very driven. And it's been one of the big things that's helped subside the doom and gloom, is that you trust your friends and you trust very cool people to be doing good work.
Oh, that's very interesting, Cameron. I know Dr. Ballard as well, and I'm not surprised that she inspired you to get more further involved. That's just quite a unique experience to spend, one-on-one with your professor, and also to have the experience at Lake St. Martin, and as you know very well, but others on the call may not, is that Lake St. Martin's in 2011 was flooded by, it was spring flooding, but it was, and they were evacuated, and in many ways were climate refugees, because they were forced to leave their community, and many of them went to the Marlborough Hotel in downtown Winnipeg and wound up staying there for years in some cases. So that's really remarkable that you had that close experience with Dr. Ballard and with those people. So thanks for sharing that. That's very, very interesting. So Susan, last but not least, Susan, if you want to share your thoughts on what got you into the climate movement and what keeps you going.
Sure. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. I guess my story starts just, I thought it would be really kind of cool to go to the University of Manitoba and take environmental sciences. Thought that was kind of like a cool thing to do. And through that experience, I gained all that knowledge and all those facts and everything. And what I realized is it didn't actually change my behaviors. It didn't change how I acted, didn't change what I did in my day-to-day life. And it wasn't until I left university, got a couple jobs around the world, that I actually experienced all of those issues that I had learned about. And that slowly started to change me. I was in Monterrey, Mexico for a job. And while I was there, I got to go hiking and experience the beauty of the country. And but when I was doing that, I actually saw the greatest amount of pollution I'd ever seen in my life. And it was kind of at those moments where I thought, oh, this is what we were talking about in university. I'd never experienced that in Winnipeg. So it got me thinking, like, how could we as humans be doing this? And how could I contribute to this? So it got me starting to think about how I can change my behaviors. I got a really cool job in Guyana, and I lived in this community. And we got to build this house for a teacher to live in, so the community would have a teacher there. And that was really cool, but that really wasn't what I took away from the experience. It was the fact that I lived in this beautiful place. I had no electricity and no running water and all of these sorts of things that I was so accustomed to have. But without them, I was so happy. I didn't need all of that stuff. And so it got me thinking about how I want to live my life and how I want to be a part of the community, how I want to help out, how I want to participate, and how I don't need a lot of stuff. I don't need to participate in that consumerism lifestyle. And that doesn't make me happy. So all of these sorts of things started to change my behaviors. And then I got this really cool job in the Bahamas. And basically, I got to go snorkeling every single day and see this beautiful habitat and visit it every single day. And it got me to appreciate nature and connect to nature and all of those things that we talk about that youth need to do so that they can, protect it, love it, and protect it. And yeah, so I was in my 20s and I got to have this wonderful experience. And it's my first time kind of like speaking out and being a voice to protect something. And so that sort of carried into my job now and what I've done since. So yeah, it was kind of a slow evolution. So if you are a youth, just know that you don't need to know what you want to do right away. Things will inspire you and change, and behaviors will definitely change. So what inspires me to continue is I get to go into classrooms, every week, talk to youth, talk to teachers who are doing amazing things. And that keeps me going. So it's a really cool experience to be able to share and see them take that knowledge and actually do some actions. There's so many great things happening in classrooms around Manitoba. And I'll share some of those with you later. But yeah, that is what inspires me.
Thanks so much, Susan. And I'm struck by how the awareness that we share sort of came to us in different ways. Like Seth came at it from a social justice. There's a lot of shared, experiences too. I mean, Seth started from the social justice, CCPA social justice into climate justice evolution kind of thing. And Cameron, you've always been concerned about social justice issues too, but then it was deepened with your connection to a specific experience, primarily with Dr. Ballard, and Susan's travel and experience in a broader worldview. So everybody's inspiration comes from, we may all get to a similar place, but it sort of has different and unique origins for each of us. And that's very interesting to hear. Thanks for sharing that with us. And so to carry on the conversation, I mean, we could even go deeper into the question of what keeps you going in the face of, like, sometimes you get, the latest news about the orange person south of the border, and some of the nonsense that comes out of there, and you can kind of like, oh wait, or the prospect of a coming federal election. and that kind of thing. And we can talk about that maybe about what, towards the end, about what keeps us going in the face of a tsunami of bad news. But we think about that. But it's before that, we'll go the next sort of opportunity for you to share your ideas with us is if you could give us an example of, because we want to be inspiring here, okay? Give us an example of what actions youth are taking now on climate that you've experienced, that you've been associated with, that you find to be inspiring. So we'll start with Seth again for that one.
Okay, sure, happily. Let me give you two examples that are youth focused. So first of all, I like to remind people, it was 5 years ago last month that we had this incredible national day, climate strike day, that was youth led, September 2019. It was the single largest mobilization in Canadian history. About 1 million people took to the streets that September day across the country, about 100,000 in my city, and that was led by high school students. And I want to, and I would say it changed the outcome of the federal election that happened the subsequent month. You know, it helped to make climate change one of the primary election issues in the 2019 election. Something else happened in my city that I want to share with you that year. I'm a little biased in the story I'm about to tell you, because my wife has been a Vancouver City Councillor the last number of years. Christine Boyle is her name. She was elected for the first time the same month that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its famous report giving us 12 years to have emissions. And so her very first motion was for Vancouver to declare climate emergency. And it passed. And Vancouver became the first city in English Canada to do that. But it was more than that. They didn't just declare a climate emergency. A lot of cities have done that. A lot of municipalities have done that. It's kind of symbolic, doesn't have a lot of substance to it. But in Vancouver's case, it led to the creation of a Vancouver Climate Emergency Plan that has a lot of substance to it. And one of the key things that it did, recognizing the fact that the largest source of emissions in most cities, including Vancouver, is the gas that we burn in our homes, is that in 2020, Vancouver passed a motion that new buildings can't use fossil fuels for space and water heating. So that was also a North American first for all new buildings. But here's where you come in. When my wife brought forward these initiatives, she was optimistic they were going to pass, but the city council at the time was very politically divided. They were all over the political spectrum. You never knew how this gang was going to vote on anything. But those early climate emergency resolutions, in fact, passed unanimously across the political divide. Now, how did that happen? First of all, my wife's really convincing and good at her job. But she would say that the reason it happened is that each time those crucial votes occurred, dozens of high school students skipped school, they rallied outside, they spoke before council, they filled the council galleries when those votes were happening, and it was in that environment where the intergenerational justice of it all was kind of thick in the air, that they kind of made it politically impossible for even the more conservative councillors to vote no. That's how it happened unanimously. And the other story I want to share with you is the work that I'm doing now. So I work with the Climate Emergency Unit, and one of our flagship campaigns is the National Campaign for a Youth Climate Corps, which of course we'd love for you all to be involved in. It's an idea that comes out of the book. It's basically, the proposition here is, what if we had a new public program, ideally federal, provincial, shared program, that said to everyone under 35, if you get the emergency, you want to spend 2 years getting trained up in a key job that we need to confront this moment, then we have a place for you. Nobody will be turned away. And we have a viral video about the Youth Climate Corps I'll throw in the chat in a moment. And I'll share some links to the campaign. But we now have chapters across the country. I understand there is a Manitoba chapter on the Youth Climate Corps that's been taking shape. This thing's got traction. We're meeting weekly with senior officials in the federal government trying to get this idea off the ground with a big ask for $1 billion a year in order to employ the first 20,000 young people full-time for a full year, paying the living wage, getting skilled up this way. And about a year ago, we commissioned a poll from Abacus Data, one of the leading national polling firms, because we wanted, I give a lot of talks to young people, and I had this hunch that there were tens of thousands of young people just waiting who get the emergency, and they're like, I want to serve. Where is my invitation? And I figured, okay, let's forget about the hunches. Let's actually test this. So we went to Abacus, and they did a national survey. The support for this idea was through the roof across the board, every demographic, every age group, every province, political orientation, doesn't make a difference. Then we asked a second question only of young people, only of people 35 and under. And we asked, if a program like this existed, how likely would you yourself be to enroll for 2 years? 65% of young people said they would consider it. 15% of them said, definitely, I get it. Now, there's about 9 million Canadians between 18 and 35. So 15% means, and this, you're asking what's inspiring to me? That means about 1.3 million young people were saying, stop boring me with all this wonky talk. I get it. I'm ready to serve. Where is my invitation? And it's one of the most inspiring campaigns I've been involved in. So I'll shut up and throw some stuff in the chat about that.
Well, before you shut up, Seth, you said $1 billion to provide a living wage for, well, it won't provide it for 1.5 million young people, but
No. That's
for 20 for a goodly number. Okay, yeah. Where did you invite that money to come from? Federal government or what?
Yeah, our feeling is that federal government should spend it.
Yeah.
The federal government budget is about $500 billion a year. So 1 billion is not a dramatic amount, but it's enough to get the program up and running. But the principle that we have is, look, create the first 20,000 positions and then let it be demand driven. Because here's the thing, you shared my book. And so my book is all structured around lessons from the Second World War, another emergency. And in that emergency, Canada was a population of about 11 million people. Over 1 million of them enlisted. And 64% of them were under the age of 21. So they were you on this call, these young people. They left their farms, they delayed their careers, they deferred their studies because they understood the emergency to be in that moment. And even though as a country, we weren't ready to receive them all, it took time to get the systems up and running. When you issue a call in an emergency, and tens of thousands of young people say, okay, I'm ready. You don't turn people away. Why would you do that in an emergency? And that's the principle that we would like to underlie it. You asked how to pay for it. The way I would most like to see the government pay for it is with a windfall profits tax on the oil and gas companies, because what could be more perfect? Charge the most profitable corporations in human history and use the money to put you all folks to work meeting this generational challenge.
That's inspiring, Seth, and very reasonable. I mean, exactly. That's for sure. And when you think about the wars that are going on around, it seems to be no problem to come up with $1 billion for bombs, but to come up with $1 billion for something constructive like this that would provide not just employment, but education and a worldview for people is so much more inspiring.
So Curt, I'm going to throw the link to the campaign website in the chat. And if people scroll down, you'll see there's a 2-minute video that maybe will give people an example of a cool video.
Very good. Now you mentioned the Youth Climate Corps, and I have a suspicion that Cameron might be involved in it in some way, shape, or form.
For folks who aren't aware, there was a rally, I think it was a week ago, 2 weeks ago, at the Legislative Building that was co-organized with the Youth Climate Corps as well too, and there were some wonderful speakers from Manitoba branch there, talking about why good green jobs are important for young people and something that we need to be pushing. These are a lot of these opportunities, at least from my experience as well too, is there are not enough of them for young people. Currently, I'm working at a youth-led nonprofit, but I've had quite a bit of experience on youth advisory councils. And for any young folks here who see a youth advisory council application or call for applications, they're usually a great experience. They will get you to look at applications for things. So just putting that out there. If you like to read, it's a wonderful thing to do. And I don't know, I find it a pretty rewarding thing, especially for project applications and funding applications. The distribution of wealth is a rewarding thing for me to do. But I've had a really wonderful opportunity to be involved with a couple of other organizations, such as, if folks are aware of Finance, Engage, and Sustain, they have a really awesome funding opportunity. I'm going to send this here for young people, specifically people in high school and their teachers, as well as a lot of really awesome resources for the classroom to talk about net zero and greenhouse gases and all of those things. But toss this in here. I had the opportunity to go over a couple of their funding applications last year, which were all led by young people from across the country for projects such as solar powers for their school, building outdoor classrooms to spend less time inside and running heating and air conditioning and things like that. So all very tangible projects that immediately reduce greenhouse gases within their community, which was super, super cool because they were all being led by young people and people under 18. So that's one example there. But another very cool thing that I'm going to share as well too, again, more so on the local scale, is a very similar project as well too, run by Earth Echo International, is young people. This is kind of talking about the cusp of biodiversity and climate solutions as well too, but young people, again, working with mentors, working with their teachers to come up with local biodiversity solutions in a competition, and then they get to compete for money to really, blast off their projects that are informed by them and supported by larger organizations and other folks in their community. But the other thing that I wanted to mention as well too is that, again, there are a good amount of opportunities out there for folks, but it's really hard to get funding for young people. So if you have an idea, I really do encourage you to look for funding streams for that. It is a little hard as a young person who may not be attached to a larger organization that usually is good at writing grants and things like that, but there are quite a few of organizations that put low barrier funding options for young people, and specifically young people who are under 18. So because I don't want to be talking at you for too long, I'm going to put another opportunity in the chat here for folks. And if you have an idea, something that you want to get off the ground in your community, and you're under 18, I really encourage you to look at the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada's 8 Fund. So this is up to $1,000 microgrant for a community-led project that is, led by you, that you can implement in your community, in your school, anything like that. I would really encourage you to look at a couple of those things for more locally led projects. And these are a couple of things that have been very inspiring to me. I'd say on kind of like the broader scale as well too, I've had a really wonderful opportunity to be involved kind of within international conversations around climate and biodiversity. And one of the very, very cool things that honestly, it makes me like super, super excited for the way that a lot of these conversations and leadership discussions are going is that seeing young people actually be at the table for international conversations on climate and biodiversity. So one of the really cool things that's happening that some countries are doing better than others is making sure that young people are going to international forums to represent their country, and they actually get to talk about text that's going into things like, I'm sure there are quite a few people here who know what the Paris Accord is, there have been big international treaties on biodiversity, but making sure that young people are actually able to talk about the things that go into there with the backing of their country. So a couple of places that have done this really well have been South America. I know that Brazil is also really big on people putting young people into their delegations as well too. So if you are looking to get into more of the international policy side of things, there are very, very cool opportunities for you to be in those spaces as well.
I've never heard of any of these before. Are these all international, or are they Canadian, or what's the nature of them?
Now for Net Zero is a Canadian organization. So all of their funding grants are going to Canadian youth. I believe that their application pool is closed right now, but it will be opening again in the next couple of months. But yeah, that report just shows a couple of the projects that were funded and youth-led projects that were funded. The Earth Echo Challenge, that one is based in the UK and also the US. Whereas the Jane Goodall one, that one is open for the next couple weeks, I believe. And that one is going towards Canadian youth. So if you're a Canadian youth who is under 18 and you have a project that you want funding for your community or for your school, you can apply to get up to $1,000 to bring that project to life.
So in each of these cases, though, we're putting the onus on the youth, right, to come up with an idea and then get funding. And this is an idea that Seth has pointed out very well, is that we, this isn't a problem that the youth has created, and so we really need leadership from the political leadership to organize things that can provide opportunities like Seth was talking about, where here it is, come and get it, rather than you tell us what you want to do and we'll give you a few dollars for it. So, but that's a good start, though, too, is to start thinking about what needs to be done to get moving on it. Susan, what examples have you got for you work with youth and educators a lot, but what inspiring examples have you got?
Yeah, first, there's so much going on in schools, which is really exciting. And I get the privilege to actually work with some youth groups and environmental groups on some of these projects. And then sometimes I just get to go and visit and see what they've done. It's actually difficult to keep track of the amount of stuff that's happening in Manitoba schools. It's really cool. I've seen a lot of groups tackle consumerism. They'll host fashion shows with secondhand clothing. They'll have clothing swaps at their school. They'll have a free store where people just drop off items and you can come and pick up stuff if you want. There's been so many wonderful things that students have thought of creatively to help other students and also help the environment. Other groups have focused on education. They have us out, come do presentations or conferences or workshops. Schools have changed their like mission statements because of the students. They put tips, climate tips in their newsletters and on their social media accounts, and really focus on environmental sustainability. There was a group that we worked with that actually had a fall supper that they had everything locally made. They sourced everything locally. They even had the sewing class sew the napkins. They had, all the right waste disposal places. It was really phenomenal, the level that they went to. And this all educated the community because of those ideas that the students had. There's so many groups that, do something for Earth Day or Earth Week and bring out local experts or have little challenges every day. It's been really inspiring. There's lots of student groups that are working on waste, whether it's composting, minimizing school supplies, having classrooms that are paper-free, waste-free lunches, collection days, all of those sorts of things. there's also a whole bunch of students that have started just to fundraise. They'll start fundraising for good causes in their community, or they'll fundraise for solar. There's a school that has a solar wall, wind turbines, solar panels, gardens, indigenous gardens, butterfly gardens, a whole bunch of different changes to their school grounds so that students can get out of the classroom and learn outside. So there's so many inspiring things that are happening. It's hard to keep track. I wish we could keep like a list on our website, but yeah, it's just hard to keep up with what everybody's doing.
Well, as I mentioned when I introduced you, Susan, you've been at it for a long time, right? You've been at it for nigh on 20 years, near enough. And do you see, and working with educators and youth for most of that time, right? Do you see, have things changed? Is it different now than it was before? Is it, what?
Yeah, I
How
think
have,
that the conversation is different. I think that we used to be, telling people of the urgency and the impact and all of that. And now let's just talk about solutions. What can I do? How can I do it? Who can be involved? All of those sorts of things. We're past that sort of tell me what I need to know. And we're in the phase of let's just start taking action. And while we're taking action, let's learn about the climate. Let's learn while we're actually doing it. So it really has changed. And we're hoping that the school systems will change too, so that it's not just all about information and knowledge and more hands-on out in the community, participating, connecting to nature, all of those sorts of things, opposed to, these are the facts.
yeah, uh, you're right. I mean, time that I've been working on this, the number of deniers that I come across, or at least the ones that are vocal and in your face, they're hopefully an endangered species, and now people are more keen to talk about talk about the solution and challenge you on whether it's practical or not, and things like that. And so that's definitely encouraging. And talking about encouraging, I'd like to encourage everybody that's on the call. If you have a question for any of our esteemed panelists here, please put them in the chat, and we'll get those answered for you. There's another idea that I'd like everyone on the panel to share, which is to do with talking about climate change, because we talked about deniers and talking to deniers, and what we're going to talk about talking to youth, and how can we talk to you? How do we talk about climate change so people will listen and are inspired to act? And this youth challenge is really to talk about influencers. And so share your ideas about how to communicate and what's a good way to communicate and get your message out there. Let's go back to Seth, and we'll start with Seth on that one.
Sure. Yeah, super important question. How do we actually talk about this in a way that works? There's this age-old debate in the movement. What motivates people more? Are they more motivated by fear, or are they more motivated by hope? It has long been my view that this is a false choice. But it's about getting the balance right. For a very long time, when I watched different climate communicators, they tended to be on one of two poles. Like, you had some people who were, so that kind of scared the bejesus out of you and almost paralyzed you. And then on the other hand, you had people talking about kind of simplistic individual solutions that sounded kind of Pollyanna, and I think didn't feel credible to people because they weren't aligned with the scope of the challenge before us. But here's the thing. Back to my book, I sort of in these moments become everyone's weird uncle, always talking about World War II. I'm going to do it again. The leaders that we most remember from World War II were these very effective communicators who walked this careful line. They were both forthright with the public about the severity of the crisis, and yet still managed to impart hope that we could rally and meet the moment. That's the magic. That's what we're going for. Um, and that's, as climate communicators, the line we're trying to walk. The truth is, when you ask people, what motivates you, it's very individual and it's varied. And we're all motivated by a complicated mix of hope and fear and anger and love. I often get asked in talks like, oh, how do you stay optimistic for people? And the truth is, a lot of the time I'm not. That's the thing about following these trends. We're in trouble. And I think most young people know it. And I think we have to honor them with the truth. But I like to quote, there's this American climate scientist named Kate Marvell, and she has this line I like, which is that this climate emergency moment doesn't need optimists. It needs heroes, by which she defines as people who do what needs to be done without the assurance that we will succeed. That's kind of the moment we're in. I think as young climate communicators, you're trying to crack another puzzle here, which is that while a lot of people will tell you, I'm nervous about climate, I'm anxious about climate, that's the good news. They should be, probably not enough. But there's also, on the flip side, an awful lot of what we might call climate illiteracy. And what I mean by that is if you poll people and say, are you worried about climate? Yes. Is it an emergency? A majority say yes. Should governments be doing more? Yes. And what should they be doing? And people go right to plastics and recycling because that's what they've heard for so long. And only about half the public correctly understands that the main source of global warming is the burning of fossil fuels. So we got our work cut out for us, connecting the dots for people that these extreme weather events are caused by climate change. We're getting better at that one, but we still kind of suck at connecting the next dot, which is connecting climate change to the burning of fossil fuels. There's another dynamic at play that I think we need to confront. You were talking about climate deniers. So the good news is, at some level, they're still out there and they're trolling you on social media and so on, but they're certainly far from the majority. For decades, the fossil fuel companies, the oil and gas companies, funded climate denial, trying to litter the landscape with lies and misinformation about climate change. They've now faced a problem. It's getting harder to do that because the reality of climate change is we're all experiencing it. We're all watching hurricane
Milton is the new one
right now, about to hit Florida. So it's harder to make the case. So the fossil fuel companies have shifted gears, and they're now engaged in something that we call solution skepticism. And I have to tell you, when I'm giving talks, including to high school audiences, I see this reflected back to me in the questions that I get. Young people are mostly getting their information from social media, and their social media feeds are littered with paid solution skepticism. So you get these questions back. Well, what about where the minerals going to come from? And what about the environmental harms of EVs? And can the electricity grid support all of this? Each of these questions is totally legitimate, by the way. But cumulatively, what the feedback is telling us is that the fossil fuel companies are succeeding in sowing doubt about the solutions, about the decarbonization and electrification that needs to happen. So I would say the goal here is really to get that balance of being forthright about the severity of the threat, but also talking about solutions and communicating agency, that there's something people could do about this. We have this ongoing campaign trying to get the CBC to start having a daily climate emergency report on the morning radio shows and on the evening news. That would strike that balance, this mix every day of how is this battle for our lives unfolding at home and abroad? What's the bad news? What's the good news? What can people do about it? Connecting the dots to the burning of fossil fuels. And the last thing I'll say on this topic, there is some very good research being done internationally about what messages most resonate. And I'm going to throw in the chat now the website for this group out of the States called Potential Energy. They've been doing surveys around the world about what messages most work. And interestingly, for this young audience, they test messages around green jobs, economic prosperity, ending injustice, fighting extreme weather. But you know what message works more effectively than any other? Protecting the planet for the next generation. The language of protecting the people and places we love is the most resonant. They've also found real resonance around this line, later is too late. We have to move now. And interestingly, for all of us experiencing these extreme weather events, they encourage us to talk about them not as natural disasters, but as unnatural disasters. We know what's causing this, and it is not natural. It's us.
Terrific, terrific. Cameron, how do you speak to youth, or how do you do it?
Yeah, totally. And thank you so much, Seth. I totally agree with a lot of the points that you've brought up. So thank you. I don't have too much to add other than that, because that felt very comprehensive and wonderful. But I think that, yeah, talking to youth, I definitely would agree that a lot of people know that we're in a crisis. They're scared of climate change. Eco anxiety is a very big thing, and I think that young people probably understand that the most out of most people. But I think that one of the barriers for young people is trying to find where their place is within the climate movement. And I think that one of the best ways, or at least one of the things that I really like to center when I'm talking to young people about the climate crisis and what to do, is really creating a culture of like good invitation, and really creating a space and sending the message that we need everybody, no matter what your skill set is, where you think you are in that skill set. We need all types of people from all different sectors, all different backgrounds, to be in this movement with us. And I think that really sending that message to folks, whether you're an artist, there are really cool like art-based approaches to climate justice that have really been taking off in the last little bit. If you are an extroverted person, we need people to be networking people and making connections between people and creating those good relationships, and really, yeah, connecting different sectors. If you're somebody who really likes to read and is super analytical, we also need people who are doing reports and writing reports. And if you're somebody like me, who feels a little bit in between everything, we also need people who are willing to be within different sectors and try and connect those dots between things. So I think that, one of the big things that we need to emphasize is this is a movement for everyone. Everyone is welcome, and we're not here to leave anyone behind. Whether, also, I think one of the other things too, whether you be a young person, whether you be somebody who is working within oil and gas or a high polluting industry, there's still space for you here, and it's a welcoming space. So that's one of the big things that I really try to focus on. But I do also want to share a couple of resources in the chat as well too. Recently had the opportunity to work on, not this link, these very fun conversation cards about how to talk about nature and climate without actually talking about nature and climate. So if you have like, I don't know, a weird aunt or something who is a climate denier, but you want to like maybe break through during Thanksgiving or start a conversation that might get you guys a little bit on the same page, there's some really awesome conversation starters in this deck called Common Ground, again, talking about how to talk about the climate crisis without actually using the word climate crisis. But as well too, for folks who, I don't know, I like to read a lot, and I always go to the literature and publish things when I'm trying to learn more about things. But lucky for you, there is a lot of really, really awesome climate communication research happening out there. For folks who are super interested in that, Yale down in the US has a really awesome climate communication Center department. I'm not quite sure what it is, but they do a lot of very good work that I'd really recommend checking out if that's your jam. There is also this really awesome organization called Neighbors United, who is super into this thing called deep canvassing, which is really about, again, kind of talking to somebody as a person rather than trying to force like the climate crisis is happening, but really kind of getting their perspective and again, kind of finding common ground on that as well too, and talking to someone as a person. But yeah, that's kind of all that I have to add to that.
Super. Thanks. Thanks, Cameron. Susan, how do you talk to youth? How do you?
Those are both really great answers. So I'll just have a little bit here. And it is a difficult question, right? Because everyone is so different. If we're trying to change behaviors, that's a really difficult thing to do. And there really isn't one answer, as sort of Seth stated. You have to combine a couple things to get people to actually change. And that's actually why we haven't had the success that we would have wanted by now, is because it isn't easy. And there isn't just one way to message. And we've gotten it wrong. We've gotten it wrong many times, right? It's hard as a scientist to try to communicate a message. We're not communicators in many, a lot of us are not communicators that have the knowledge. So that's also been sort of a barrier. And us having to change behaviors is really, really difficult. So I believe focusing on solutions is sort of the answer, making sustainable actions the norm, or even just modeling those behaviors while educating is a great way. So if we are youth, just start practicing sustainable behaviors, start trying to change your behaviors. Hopefully that will then change your friends, that will change and inspire your family, that will then maybe change something in your community. So if we all start practicing more sustainable behavior, and even just having those climate conversations more, hopefully that will make environmental issues a priority, and hopefully change through actions and behaviors.
Let's just sort of start with building that social network, like by identifying for yourself as being a climate activist or climate concerned, and then sharing that with your friends. That's what you're saying, Susan, is as a good starting step. I'm going to chime in here about myself and how because I kind of work on this too. And for me, as an engineer and solution-oriented person, I like to see a picture of what does success look like. What does that look like? And so I'm going to put in the chat here a link to the Road to Resilience, which many of us hopefully are aware of. But that in that document that we published a few years ago now, it shows, or it details at least the key elements of the pathway to solution. Because when we talk about the rallies that come out to and inspire, and we say take action on climate change, well, if you wanted, what does action look like? That's what the question that I wanted to answer for myself, and that's what led to the Road to Resilience, is to lay it out and say what does action look like, and that's what the Road to Resilience has done. And then I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm actually going to put a PDF in the chat. And so you can, there it is, the Road to Resilience policy recommendations. Now this is, policy is not as exciting for everyone as it is for me. All right. But it's actually pretty important. And the document I put into the chat is got 23 recommendations that if we believe that if they were implemented, would actually enable Manitoba, and this is a Manitoba solution, to stop heating our buildings with fossil gas and stop requiring gasoline and diesel to move goods and people. So that we tried to put it into something that's digestible. And 23 is a number you can get your mind around, and it's broken up into 3 sections. And so when I talk to people, mostly they're policymakers now. They like, I don't. That's what my focus is getting inside the room rather than being outside the room, pounding the drum so much. Because that's there. Everybody's got a place. Everybody, as Seth was saying, if it wasn't for Christine Boyle wouldn't have been successful with the climate emergency legislation if people hadn't been on the street banging the drum about, especially youth banging the drum about what was needed there. What solution, just to sort of like bring it down, what solution are you most excited about? What potential is it out there? Maybe on the horizon, or maybe on the cusp, something that's coming up that you think that you have excited, got you excited. Seth?
Well, look, there's lots of solutions that excite me. I mean, all of the stuff around decarbonizing, electrifying homes excites me. And all of the stuff around indigenous land defense excites me. We do a lot of work with the doctors at the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment on the campaign to ban fossil fuel advertising. And I really like that one. It's been led by Charlie Angus with his private members bill. And when he first presented that bill, oh my gosh, the reaction, he just got, he got all kinds of, he got some death threats. I mean, the fossil fuel industry really set their hair on fire. But here's the thing, that's the tell. If sometimes I say to people, if you want to know if a climate policy really matters, look at the reaction of the fossil fuel companies. If they're on stage saying we can get behind this plan, not a climate emergency plan. If they're panicked and reacting like they are to the fossil fuel ad ban, now you know you're onto something. That's an exciting solution. I mentioned before the campaign to get a windfall profits tax on oil and gas, but let me just answer this way. So I want to put in the chat our website at the Climate Emergency Unit. There's another video right there on the homepage, a little 6-minute video that you might like. But also under the About Us, you can look up our work. The framework we employ is what we call the 6 markers of emergency. This is how we think about solutions. We have spent far too long in incremental mode, barely bending the curve. We need actual climate emergency policies, and climate emergency policies hit one or more of the 6 markers, which are: you spend what it takes to win, you create audacious new institutions to get the job done, you move from voluntary to mandatory policies as needed, you commit to tell the truth, you commit to leave no one behind, and you center Indigenous rights and title. Those are the 6 markers of emergency. That's how you know when a policy is actually an emergency policy. Part of what's appealing to us about the Youth Climate Corps, which is my final exciting thing I want to reiterate, is that it hits almost all 5 of those 6 markers, and it communicates to society at large. If we had a real climate emergency corps, a Youth Climate Corps, excuse me, it would communicate to society at large, and to young people especially, that we are now in emergency mode and issuing an invitation for you to join in a grand undertaking. You know, sometimes people say, oh, you know, don't scare the young people with all this stuff. My answer is, as I said before, young people know. They're alive to the news and events. And they know that the climate emergency is coming for them. It's going to enlist them. It will enlist them, likely not at a time of their choosing. It's going to press them into service. It's not going to ask their permission, and it's going to test their character. And really, the only question before them is, are they going to respond reactively in the face of these emergency events, or do they want to respond preemptively on their terms? And if it's the latter, something like the Youth Climate Corps is for them. And the final thing I'll say, you know, Susan was mentioning like all the individual things we can do in our lives, which we absolutely have to do. You know, I've there's no natural gas in my house, and all of our vehicles electric. We're trying to change the things in our personal life. But my caveat is, if we're hoping for people to individually do all these things voluntarily, we're fried. The solution is inherently collective and therefore political. So I'm sort of answering Dennis's question here in the chat. It's inherently a collective political endeavor. It is, do all of those important things in your individual lives to get the gas out of your home and out of your transportation. But you got to protest. You got to find and support climate champions running for office. If you don't have those people, you got to be those people. Because we're only going to achieve this politically and to mobilize all of society.
Thanks, Seth. And if you need to leave the call for your family, don't feel bad. We won't be insulted. But you had indicated that you might have that.
Thank you very much, everybody. Good luck.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Seth. That was really great. Curt, I don't want to answer that question after Seth, because Seth answered that so great.
He did.
But maybe Cameron has something to answer about a solution that excites.
Yeah.
It's a hard act to follow up, but it's been really interesting to me to see the shift in research from just focusing on Western science, and that's awesome and great. And we obviously need that, but we do also need the community informed perspectives as well. And we do need to be really cherishing different forms of knowledge as well, and specifically, very intimate relationships with the lands and waters. And it's been a really, really beautiful thing to see that be centered as well too within a lot of research methodology. And I think that that's something that really excites me. But yeah, something else that I know, I'll also kind of be on the policy side of this real quick. But for folks who aren't aware, there was a federal bill that just actually passed royal assent, I think in June, which also kind of speaks to my excitement about working with BIPOC communities and centering BIPOC voices within the environmental world. But we are going to be working, or the federal government is going to be working on a national strategy to prevent and address environmental racism, while also working to advance environmental justice. So this is a really, really big thing for a lot of communities and nations that have experienced a lot of environmental discrimination and racism, to actually get their dues paid, and to start working on pathways that are going to be centering people and justice, as well as solutions that actually work. But that's something that I'm very excited about. And I think that really marries the two, kind of like social justice aspect part of environmental work, and also the kind of real solutions part as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. And yeah, you're right. Like, I mean, even like we never did land acknowledgements 5 years ago, right? I mean, it's and even though sometimes you think it's just sort of checking a box, it does mean that we're conscious of what we're, we have to be at least somewhat conscious of what you're saying. And it's changing the attitude towards the injustice that surrounds us. So yeah, thanks for that. We're getting close, talking about something that excites, potential solution, something that excites. The work that I was talking about, policy and working on policy, that there is something on the horizon related to geothermal and a broad, potentially a broad implementation of geothermal. I can't speak too much about any details, but there's a lot of conversation going on about the importance of geothermal for heating. So not heating our buildings without fossil gas is a big challenge. And I think we detailed it in the Road to Resilience. Some of the key recommendations are in there about geothermal. And it's just, I'm inspired by the fact that there's some potential. I think it would be time to thank our sponsors for their contributions and their support for us. And so one of our supporters is Efficiency Manitoba's e-generation initiative. And I don't know, Jennifer, could you put the link in the chat for folks so they can see how Efficiency Manitoba is supporting education for youth on energy issues, primarily energy issues. Another supporter of ours is Can Sustain. Thank you, Tanis Osterman, and her company Can Sustain is a supporter. Also, Red River College Polytech is a supporter, as is CBC Manitoba. And so with that, I would like to thank you all. There, Jennifer's just put a couple of key links in the chat for you to get more information, as if you didn't get enough information in this session already. But with that, I want to thank you all for joining us. And I'd like to thank our panelists, Seth Klein, who donated his precious time. Cameron Armstrong donated her precious time, as did Susan Lindsay. And thank you also, Jennifer, for your support. So with that, I wish you all a good evening, and thank you again for joining us. Hope you're all inspired. And carry on.